simply wanted to welcome you and hand you over to the moderator, Anna. So Anna, please join us. And this is also going to be live streamed. So if you want to be tweeting it out, here are some hashtags for you. Thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you so much, Melanie, for letting us use this beautiful space, the Parliamentary Pavilion at COP28 in Dubai. So my name is Anna Rose. I'm the CEO of Environmental Leadership Australia. We're very excited to be putting this panel on today. Environmental Leadership Australia was founded with the Maya Foundation in 2019 to support and build the basis for bipartisan support on climate action in Australia. We work to advance practical, evidence-based climate and environmental policy to ensure a prosperous future for all Australians. And we really believe that climate action cannot just be an issue for one side of politics. It requires all of us, and the key message we've heard over the last few days here in Dubai is around collaboration. So we specialise, as a result of that, in supporting leadership on climate from within the conservative side of politics, both emerging and current political leaders. We believe these leaders have traditionally been underserved by the traditional environment movement, and we're here to fill that gap. Reducing emissions is complex, and it requires long-term planning, and that's why a collaborative approach in politics is so important. Between 2022 and 2050, Australia will have 9 federal elections and around 48 state and territory elections. So anyone who thinks that only one side of politics can deal with this needs to look at those numbers. The only viable way for lasting, sustainable climate policy is when we have all sides of politics engaging. And on that note, it is an absolute honour to introduce our incredible panellists who I've had the privilege of spending the last 3 days with here in Dubai. So first we have the Honourable Paul Fletcher, who's a very senior and experienced minister in the former Australian government, where he was Communications Minister, and his current role is Shadow Science and Innovation Minister in the Australian government, so very relevant to the discussions we've been having. We then have the Honourable Matt Kean, who is the Shadow Health Minister in New South Wales and well known to all of us as the former Climate and Energy Minister and Treasurer in New South Wales. We have Kelly Sloan, who was elected to the New South Wales Parliament at our last election. She is the Shadow Environment Minister in New South Wales. And then we have Sam O'Connor, who is the Shadow Environment Minister and Shadow Minister for the Great Barrier Reef and a few other portfolios as well in the great state of Queensland. So I'll start with a question for Paul. So you're a Cabinet Minister in the former Australian government. Can you share the rationale for the decision to adopt net zero by 2050?
Well, thanks, Anna, and great to be here. I think there were several factors. First of all, we were obviously monitoring the progress we were making as a nation towards our previous target, 26 to 28% reduction by 2030. And indeed, by the time we left government, it was clear that we were going to exceed that target. So that was important because it linked to the second factor, which is, a sense of confidence that net zero by 2050 is something that is an achievable target. And one of the things that influenced our thinking was the progress we were making as a nation towards the previous target. And I think the third factor was, of course, the electoral process and the sentiment coming from electorates all around the country. And that's a very important thing, because in a democracy, governments need to lead, but they also need to reflect. There's an iterative process between governments and the people they represent. So I think all those factors came together.
Thank you very much. So Matt, you're widely acknowledged as a real leader in the climate and energy space across Australia, and you introduced some really groundbreaking legislation in New South Wales during your time. For the benefit of the global audience, can you share a bit about what you did in New South Wales and why?
Well, thanks, Anna, and thanks everyone for being here today. I was the Energy and Environment Minister in the New South Wales Conservative government, and I'm very proud that during my tenure we implemented some of the most ambitious climate targets anywhere in the country, which at the time were very forward-leaning. We were one of the first jurisdictions to in fact put an interim target of 2035, reducing our emissions by 70%. We legislated 50% reduction by 2030 and committed obviously to net zero. In addition to that, we legislated the biggest and most ambitious renewable energy policy in the country, and that was a policy that will build enough capacity to replace coal in the state of New South Wales. And for those of you not from New South Wales, we are the majority of our electricity, 80% of our electricity comes from coal at this point. We have legislated that we can build enough capacity to replace that coal by 2030. So that's effectively renewables, firming, storage and transmission to not have to rely on any coal by 2030. That's not to say that coal won't exist. That's just to say that if we got desperate, we would have the ability to replace it completely. And it was a Conservative government that legislated that. In addition to that, we adopted the most aggressive waste policy when it came to emissions. In fact, all sections of the economy, we had policies to help us decarbonise, which set New South Wales on track to lead not only the nation, but was up there in line with some of the most advanced countries when it comes to tackling climate change. And we did it not just because we care about the environment, we did it because we're a Conservative government that believes in free markets and the power of innovation and capital. And that was driving our policies. And we rolled out policies that would help lower cost of living, drive investment and grow our prosperity. And I think that's very much in line with Conservative values. So it was completely consistent with who we were.
And for those outside Australia, New South Wales is Australia's largest state in terms of population and also the biggest kind of economic engine of the Australian economy. So what happens in New South Wales is very significant, not just for Australia, but for the rest of the world as well.
And could I mention, we also put the biggest fund together to help heavy industry decarbonise in the country. So a $1.5 billion fund to help our big industrial manufacturers, steelmakers, aluminium smelters to upgrade their kit to decarbonise. So we were supporting heavy industry because we believe that manufacturing is critical for our state and we want to see it sustainable into the future.
So on the theme of New South Wales, continuing on to Kelly Sloan. So Kelly, you were just elected at the last election at our state parliament, but you've already made a significant mark on environment and climate policy with 2 pieces of legislation in particular that you've managed to make your mark on. Could you talk a bit about the net zero bill in New South Wales and also the offshore oil and gas legislation?
Sure. I mean, I came into politics to make a difference. I've been in the for-purpose sector for the last 8 years, and so it was incredibly inspiring to me to, ride on the coattails of people like Matt Keane and make sure that we preserve that important and strong environmental legacy. So an example of that, and you reflected on a couple of bills. One of them was a bill introduced by the new Labor government, a climate and energy bill. It was in effect a retreat from Conservative policies that we implemented under Matt and the former government. It was very important for us to protect that. And I know at COP, so much of the conversation has been around collaboration, how important collaboration is across nations, across industries. And I think it's equally important in government and across political parties. And if we can preserve a decent and mature dialogue around the environment, if we can protect our planet, have a clean planet by not going dirty in politics, then I think it's going to be a better world. And that's what we tried to do recently. So in effect, the 70% target by 2030 reduction in emissions, that really progressive target, which was achievable, by the way, and on track, would have effectively been removed under Labor's legislation. So we worked very hard to seek amendments to make sure that was in legislation. It was a bumpy road, and Labor went down a campaign. I don't like to get too political here, but send out sort of ads saying the coalition was trying to block the legislation and champion your local MP to support net zero. It was a unfortunate turn of events which could have turned everything sour, but we were able to work collaboratively with our crossbench colleagues, and Labor came on board and we were able to preserve that 70% target. So that's one example of what we were able to do from opposition when we work in collaboration across all parties. And to their credit, Labor then accepted that. The other piece of legislation that we championed and my colleagues championed and I helped support was a bid to put forward a ban on offshore gas and oil off the New South Wales coast. We didn't get that one through. It's gone to committee. It's still hanging in the balance, but we've been able to be a very loud and proud voice on that, a champion for our environment. And I have to say I'm pretty pleased that I entered politics because I feel like we're able to make a lot of good.
Thank you. Very glad you entered politics as well. And over to Sam. So Sam, you're in opposition and you haven't yet been in government, but I'd love if you could outline some of your thinking and policy priorities in environment and climate as an area.
Thanks, Anna, and it's really, really good to be here. The number one priority for me, if I'm able to be Environment Minister this time next year, will be increasing Queensland's protected estate. So Queensland has obviously the Great Barrier Reef, that is our largest natural asset. It's got a range of protections in place for it already, but on land, it's just 8.38% of our state has some sort of conservation covenant over it. So if we're really going to be serious about protecting our environment, it has to start there. It is quite literally the front line of the battle for environmental and conservation in Queensland. And I'm really interested in how we can unlock that aligned with who we are as a party. We represent a lot of agricultural areas. We've got one member of parliament in our team who covers 426,000 square kilometres. He's one electorate. We cover a lot of the land that we need to protect, and I think that puts us in a unique position to be able to lead the conversation around getting private landholders into conservation. It really is something that we're under-investing in Queensland. It's something that can complement agriculture. It can make agriculture more sustainable, and the nature of our land in our state dictates that is the policy that we need to go down. So increasing our protected estate, and not only that, better managing our protected estate. So even though our estate is only 8.38%, it's bigger than Tasmania, it's very poorly managed. The best estimates we have about feral pigs, for instance, are we've got about 6 million feral pigs in Queensland, and that's just the ones that we can know about or have some idea about. There's a lot of our conservation estate that is not properly managed, and that's a deterrent to landholders as well when you are expanding national parks, because they view a national park as the worst neighbour you can have. So we need to change that conversation for landholders as well. And the other thing for our state is we are far behind the rest of the nation in terms of our waste system and our recycling system. We recycle about 47% in Queensland compared to the national average of about 63%. And with our agricultural sector, there's huge opportunities for us in not only organic waste, particularly with sustainable aviation fuel, but getting our cities on board as well. In Brisbane, which is the third largest city in Australia, we don't have a FOGO rollout. It's underway, but it should be well and truly progressed by now. And our waste sector is something that we really, really need to focus on as well.
And Sam, I've also heard you speak very passionately about home electrification and small business electrification. Can you say a little about that opportunity as well?
I think that's something that's aligned with who we are as well as a party. It's about empowering people. It's about empowering households. And I think there's a real space for us to play in, particularly in that zero interest loan space, in the finance space. I think that's the key to unlocking home electrification. And that's something we'd like to look at in Queensland. We've got a lot of areas as well that it would work for regionally, where they perhaps don't need to be connected to the main grid. Being such a large state, there's big opportunities in that. Indigenous communities as well. I think it's a real opportunity for us to look into that a bit more. But we have got the highest solar penetration in the world. I think it's about 45% of households in Queensland, but it's that storage aspect. So if we can unlock that finance for people to store that energy during the day so they can use it at night, that'll go a long way to reducing our emissions, which are the largest in Australia, unfortunately.
Right. Well, that's a great segue to my next question for Paul, which is around the actual implementation. So, Paul, can you talk a bit about, the difference in your mind between setting the targets and then actually implementing it?
Yeah, and look, to pick up on the point that Sam made, I think the role of the market, the role of the private sector in getting the technology that's needed into the hands of the millions and billions of households around the world. I was communications minister in the last government, and there are some interesting parallels between telco and the whole climate tech world. The smartphone was only introduced in 2007. There are now 6.5 billion smartphones in the world. So when you look at some of the take-up that's needed of solar panels, of heat pump hot water systems, of electric vehicles, those numbers can look pretty daunting. But when you look at what has been achieved in other sectors and the way that the market can work, extraordinary growth can be achieved. So I think the role of the market's very important. And as a centre-right political party, I think, the Liberal Party is very interested in the question of, okay, how do you achieve against setting a target? Setting a target, you make the big announcement, media conference, media release, etc., etc. But then there's the hard grind, month after month, year after year. And again, to draw an analogy with my previous portfolio of communications, our political opponents committed to what was called the National Broadband Network in Australia. After 4 years, they'd only delivered 50,000 homes connected. It needed to get to 11 million. We came to government and we put in place a plan to get it done. So I guess the point I'd make is one of the issues from a centre-right perspective is, okay, the target's one thing, but what's the plan? What's the role of the private sector? What's the role of sales and marketing expertise in persuading millions and ultimately billions of consumers and households to take up the technology that's needed? So I think those are all things that, from a centre-right perspective, we think about very carefully.
Thank you. Matt, can you talk a bit about how you see this policy area intersecting with those centre-right values and the Liberal philosophy?
Yeah, sure. I think that Donald Trump and Tony Abbott give Conservatives a bad name when it comes to tackling climate change. In fact, they're the outliers when it comes to Conservatives' response in a policy sense to one of the greatest challenges of our time. The reality is that most centre-right governments are actually leading the way when it comes to this issue. Look at the Boris Johnson / Theresa May governments. Look at the Merkel government in Germany. Look at Emmanuel Macron. Again, centrist and centre-right governments are leading the way when it comes to tackling climate change. And I think the reason that's the case is because Conservatives believe that we're not just custodians of the present, we're guardians of the future. And Conservatives have always believed there's an intergenerational contract between the past, the present, and the future. And, what could be more important to conserve than the future of our planet? What could be more important to conserve than the prosperity of our people? Now, climate change is an environmental challenge. There's no doubt about that. And Conservatives have a long history, particularly in Australia, of standing up for the environment. In my state of New South Wales, Tom Lewis was a Liberal Premier who set up the National Parks and Wildlife Service. It was Liberal governments that protected the Great Barrier Reef, Fraser Island, Kakadu National Park. These are some great examples of Conservative governments leading the way when it comes to environment policy. And that seems to have been lost in Australian politics. But I think we can reclaim it in line with our values that believe in free markets. As you're seeing at COP, this is not just a convention of environmentalists, it's a convention of business people. Capital has made up its mind on this issue, and I firmly believe the problem will be solved through the channeling of private capital through free markets. And that's why we're seeing incredible innovation, incredible advancements in science when it comes to new technologies around hydrogen, the efficiency of solar panels, and a whole range of things that are going to solve these problems. So it is in line with Conservative values, Conservatives who believe in free markets, that we tackle this issue, because this is ultimately an issue that will be solved by private capital, free markets, and also people who are committed to leaving our planet better than we found it. And the Liberal Party in Australia, let me just finish with this note, has always been at its best when it's fought to build a better, more prosperous country for everyone. And the moment we stop talking about building a better, more prosperous country for everyone is the moment the public in Australia stop voting for us. And I'm not about to let that happen to my party that I love.
That actually, I wonder, Kelly, if you've seen any changes in your electorate over time and the kind of community expectations in this space that Matt's referring to.
Yeah, I have, and therein lies part of the problem or the challenge, I think, for politicians, for community leaders, and that is, we see the scientists here, we see the business makers. We are the translators, in effect, or the conduit between that and then our constituents who have other very real concerns in their life. So we've seen climate as a priority slipping down the ladder, I guess. Not because they don't care anymore, but because there are very real cost of living consequences, and we need to address that. And I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I see my friend Andrew Bragg, Senator Bragg, who's also a fan of home electrification. I think that's one of the channels to connecting people with the potential prosperity or the easing of those cost of living pressures through some changes that we can make in our households. And that's what I'm interested in doing in at the moment, in the sort of the first part really of my parliamentary career, is doing a lot of listening, a lot of connecting with the community and finding out how can we help you and how can we make environment the solution. And I think there's enormous opportunity there. It is going to be a bumpy ride, and people are facing some very real issues at the moment. And we need to talk about what this kind of work will do from the capital injections into our economy, from the great opportunity we have in Australia as a place that is incredibly sunny and windy and resource rich, and then how important it is for our children. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to get into politics. I've got 3 boys at home. I've worked for the last 8 years with kids. I want them to have clean air and fresh water and to have strong mental health, and that's all linked to climate as well. So I guess that's my retail perspective.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we might ask the next question to everyone, but starting with you, Sam. As Kelly said, we have met with a lot of experts and we've heard about the opportunities and the challenges and the finance and so many different things. Out of all the discussions that we've had here at COP, what's one takeaway that you'll be bringing back to Australia in terms of what you've learnt?
I think it's just really drummed home the scale of it to me. Not only the scale of the problem, but the scale of the opportunity and just the way that the world has shifted towards this. I think it's one thing to see it in a domestic context and to see it within your state and within your nation, but to see it at this scale is just unbelievable. I've really, really been blown away, and there's quite a few things I'm going to follow up on for Queensland because there are huge opportunities that we have for Australia, and our state in particular has to be the forefront of that. So I've just been really privileged to see the sights and take it all in. So
amazing. We might go to Paul next. What about you, your big takeout from the past few days?
Well, thanks, Anna. I think probably for me the big takeout is the amount of scientific and technological innovation being deployed. So much creative thinking. It was fantastic to wander around the startup village in the green zone yesterday. Spoke to quite a few companies there. To just mention one, UU, Kyoto University, I think it is, doing membrane-based technology to separate out CO2 from output from industrial plants, gas plants and other plants. And it's consistent with what I've observed in Australia as Shadow Minister for Science. So many brilliant companies, so many brilliant innovators, companies like SunDrive, who are doing solar panels using copper as the connective element, not silver. Minerals Carbon International in Newcastle, who are also looking at CO2 as an input, in their case, to bricks. Jupiter Ionics, Monash University, new processes for ammonia. But just seeing the amount of innovation here, the number of companies, universities and others from all around the world, ultimately this is a challenge for human innovation and ingenuity. And I have to say that looking at the amount of energy, effort, innovation, smart thinking being deployed to this problem, it's a daunting problem, but you have to be impressed by the scale of the work that's being done to respond to it.
And to follow up from that, do you feel like Australia has a particular competitive advantage in that space?
I think it's a globally very competitive space, and certainly I think Australia has a lot of very smart people, great universities, and an increasingly confident culture of innovation. Look, it's globally competitive, and that's a good thing. Let's see the brightest minds from around the world tackling these problems, and it's pretty clear that's what's happening.
Yeah. Matt?
Well, firstly, can I just touch on an answer Paul gave? I think Australia has an enormous opportunity to gain a competitive advantage when it comes to the low carbon economy. And the reason I say that is because I think when it comes to the cost of energy, Australia has a chance to have some of the lowest cost reliable energy anywhere on the planet. Now that flows through the entire economy, through manufacturing to households. No one can win more in this transition than Australia, but we need the policy settings right. And to get that competitive advantage, we need to deploy renewables at scale yesterday, okay? Because it's only wind and solar backed up by firming that can get energy prices to be the lowest anywhere in the world. Any other technologies put that competitive advantage at risk, and that will come at the expense of our industry and our competitiveness. So yes, we should be open to the possibility of different technologies. There's no question about that. There may be a silver bullet that emerges at some time in the future, but right now we know what the solution is. It's rolling out wind and solar at scale, because that will give us some of the cheapest energy per unit anywhere on the planet, and that gives Australia an enormous competitive advantage. The second thing, just addressing the actual question, is what is the opportunity I've seen here, or what's the
what's
thing
your
I've
big
taken
takeaway
out?
from this?
The opportunity for Australia to win in a low carbon world. Nowhere on the planet has better wind or solar resources than Australia. And using that wind and solar, we can create the low carbon products that the rest of the world is going to need to decarbonise, the green steel, the hydrogen, the green aluminium, and then we can ship that to help the rest of the world meet their decarbonisation needs. So we're not only able to do our bit for the planet, we're able to become a very, very prosperous nation in a way that no generation of Australians has ever seen before if we get the policy settings right. And now's not the time to play politics or point scoring. Now is the time to put the foot on the accelerator and make sure we win the future.
Kelly, how about you? What are you going to be taking home from this?
I think a single word, and that is hope. And I think that's very important, because often when we talk about climate, it feels like a burden. Oh my gosh, it's this huge problem we have to solve. And absolutely it is. And you look at, from the outside, those of you watching on webcam hi from Australia around the world, you look at this bubble that we're in. And we're in a bubble. It is a bizarre world, this COP conference. And there are so many contradictions, but within it, so many ideas, so much capital flowing, so many problem solvers, so much innovation. So I come out with enormous hope and optimism. So I think that's a great starting place. It certainly is the kind of energy we all need as well.
And there is all of that momentum. I wonder, communicating all of this as a topic area, climate, energy, environment, where do you see the opportunity for the conservative side of politics, the centre right of politics, to connect with voters on those policy issues? Perhaps, Kelly, if you want to...
I just think we have to speak in really tangible terms about what it means to people's everyday lives and the differences that we're going to see in our communities, whether it's the economic impact of being stagnant in our decision making, why it's important to be brave so that our kids have fresh water and clean air, so that the biodiversity is protected. And that's one of my concerns as well. And I think people still very strongly want to protect our native species that are dying at terrible rates. The extinction rates are on the increase, and we're seeing the results of bushfires and floods, and I think that's something that can coalesce, and so talking in tangible terms, speaking about why this is important, about how it will save people money, not dumbing it down by any means, but I think brave political leadership and understanding, and not calling people NIMBYs because they don't want windmills and solar farms and whatever, understanding those concerns and talking to them about how we can address some of those risks. And again, in the climate amendments that we made in the New South Wales Parliament, we went a long way to addressing some of the risks by putting farmers in key decision-making positions, putting the Agriculture Commission on the Net Zero board, those kind of things. We need to do more of that. We need to understand the concerns, the very real concerns of people as they go through this very bumpy journey. So talking, listening, and being very tangible.
I might go to Sam and then Matt on this question, particularly, you're one of the younger MPs in the Queensland Parliament. How do you communicate these issues and your priorities to younger voters in particular?
I think for people in our party in particular, it's partly not being afraid of talking about these issues. There's a reluctance amongst some of our MPs to not even delve into climate change. They just view it as a sort of leftist issue that you don't want to go anywhere near. But I think stepping up and actually getting in that conversation is where we need to be. But there's no debate about where we're going. From either major party, there is no debate about the trajectory of this. The debate is solely about how we get there. And we are well equipped to contribute to that and to be part of that, because this is about a huge amount of industrialization and about capital and businesses moving in this direction. And it's moving the language away from loss as well. For Queensland, because I'm a Queenslander, we're very passionate about Queensland, if you've ever met a Queenslander before, the problem will be not having enough workers to fill the jobs. It's not about a loss of workers. It's about not having enough people to do the jobs to build what is coming. It's about not having enough miners to dig up the resources that we will have, because we have a lot of what the world is looking for and what the world will need. It's not about loss, it's about opportunity, and it's about that potential that we all have to tap into. And I think finding a way to talk about it that aligns with who we are. We've all talked in ways that align with our party values. That's what action on this is about. And we need to be unashamed about that and be brave and to continue that conversation.
Matt, I saw you keen to jump in there.
I think Conservatives can talk to the electorate on these issues by talking about our values. Firstly, the value of ensuring that we hand our planet to our kids better than we found it. And I say that, I'm just looking at a beautiful little bub over there, and I'm reminded of my experience as a new dad, as the new energy minister in 2020, walking out of the maternity ward at Hornsby Hospital in the middle of the Black Summer bushfires and not being able to breathe the air. And that wasn't my past, that wasn't my childhood, and I didn't want it to be my son's childhood, and I don't want it to be anyone's childhood. And the decisions we take now can ensure that that's not the case, that that's not the norm. We can still do something about this. And in doing so, we can also talk to the other value that Liberals believe in, and that's, economic prosperity. And by leaning into this, by rolling out wind and solar, we can help lower household bills. We can ease cost of living pressure. We can create jobs. We attract enormous capital into our country, which helps us build new industries and underwrite a new era of economic prosperity for everyone. That is the chance before us. And if the Liberal Party, the party that's always been about free markets and building economic freedom and prosperity for people, is not going to do that, then someone else will step up and do it. And we saw the political consequences of not doing that. And we saw half of our heartland wiped out at the last federal election, a fate we avoided at the state level because we lent into this issue. So there is also political upside in taking this issue on and applying our values to it.
Thank you. Well, the next one, we've got just a couple more questions before we wrap up, but I might hand to Paul. We've seen an unprecedentedly large COP this year, and there's been so much happening. I would wonder, what you would say to colleagues back home that are interested in attending future COPs or learning what it's all about.
Well, I think there is a lot to learn here. Certainly the number of businesses represented, the number of technology solutions being presented, but also the chance to engage with other centre-right parliamentarians and legislators from around the world, parliamentarians of all political persuasions, but there are a lot of centre-right legislators from around the world. And, of course, the issues that are faced in one country in many ways very similar to those faced in other countries. So I think there's a lot for legislators to learn, and I would certainly encourage colleagues to be coming in the future. I note that we do have a lot of federal coalition MPs, Liberal and National Party members and senators who are here, and I know we're all getting a lot of value from it.
Fantastic. Any thoughts from Kelly and Sam on that?
Oh, will come if they get the opportunity. We can connect you with Anna Rose. Anyone back home who wants to come to the next one? No, it's an amazing conference, and I'm so glad that I did come. Not just the science side of things, but the business side of things. It's become such a signature event for the world, and the more Australians who can see this, I don't think anyone could deny where we're going and the way that our country can play a role in that if they came to one of these conferences. So I'd encourage all Australian legislators to get here at some point, whenever the next ones are and wherever they are.
And I'd echo that and also say that it's not just about COP. It's about the people that you meet at COP and the connections and the ongoing learning that I expect is going to happen afterwards. I've collected a lot of cards and I'm going to be making a lot of phone calls and staying in touch with people, and that's one of the benefits as well.
So final question, which I'll ask to everyone, perhaps starting with you, given you've got the microphone, Kelly. Why is climate important to you personally? Maybe taking the politician hat off for a minute. Why do you want to lead on this space?
Look, I think personally I grew up in a regional town and did a lot of camping, spent a lot of time in nature. And I think as Aussies, we feel very connected to our water, to our beaches, to our land. You know, I'm inspired by the Indigenous Australians as well and their connection, which is very thoughtful and also a way of, you know, leadership for our future and our conservancy. It just feels like the right thing to do. It's a really hard thing to explain. I do want a better future for our kids, which is what I've been talking about a lot today. That's vitally important. It's important to our economy, but it just feels... I feel like we're at a tipping point, I really do. And I don't want to be dramatic about it, but I feel like this is the right point in time to be making a difference. And if I can help do that, then I really want to be part of the picture.
Thanks. And Sam, what about yourself?
I love my state. That's what this is about. I mean, we've got more to lose than anywhere else in Australia, other than the headline thing of the Great Barrier Reef, which is not only our greatest environmental asset, but it's a huge job creator. It's a huge part of our tourism industry. It's iconic and it's at genuine risk. And on land, there's over 1,000 threatened species in Queensland. The things that we love about our state are genuinely at risk. And I think it's also being a relatively younger parliamentarian. I've got a few more grey hairs than when I did get elected, but I'm 32, and this is something I've grown up with. It's something I would probably be one of the first generations who had this all through our schooling, and this was just an accepted issue that we had to deal with as a planet. And I've tried to advocate for this even before I was in the role of Shadow Environment Minister. It's really important to my generation, and I'm obligated to step up and do what I can.
Thanks. Paul, how about yourself?
Look, I think the thing that really engages me is not the question of the challenge, because I think we'll understand that, but that over the last few years, some of the things that ordinary people can do, the steps you can take in your own life, have become much clearer. In our household, like many Australians, we got rooftop panels 5 years ago. Next step was a heat pump dryer. Next step, heat pump hot water system. And when you come at it as a consumer, the steps you can take, once you start to look into it, pretty clear, and they make sense economically as well as making your own small contribution. So for me, I think one of the things that's really engaging about the subject is the way that the technological innovation is manifesting in a way that gives, the products are in the market, there are things that all of us can do, and I think you can have a degree of optimism that flywheel effect is only going to continue. And so while, one of the clear issues is not getting overwhelmed by the scale of the challenge, there's an increasing number of things that any individual can do, and if you're a bit of a tech nerd, that's also pretty interesting.
Fantastic. Matt, you've spoken a little bit about this, but yeah, what kind of keeps you going in this space?
I think as I said, my son, the year he was born, we saw the worst bushfires that our country has ever seen. And that it followed the worst drought our country had ever seen. And they were followed by the worst floods our country had ever seen. That climate change is not some theory that's going to happen in the future. It is happening right now. And I don't want that to be my son's future. I don't want that to be anyone's children's future. And every generation has stood up and fought to make the future better for the next generation. You know, my grandparents' generation went off to war to fight fascism and tyranny, and they came back and built, you know, a strong and secure Australia that we all benefit from today. My parents' generation fought for greater Indigenous rights and greater women's rights. This is the challenge of our generation. This is the challenge of our times, and it's incumbent on us to step up and leave our future better than we found it. And that's what I want to be part of, and I want to work with all of you to make sure we deliver on that promise to the next generation of leaving our planet, our economy, a little bit better, a little bit stronger, and a little bit more prosperous than we found. And I think we've just got to take that chance, and we can do it, and this conference gives me hope that we're going to get there.
Fantastic. Well, that's probably a good place to wrap. And in summary, for colleagues who've just arrived, what we've been discussing, I think, is really at the heart of where we're going on climate, which is we've talked about technology and innovation, market forces, the global flows of capital, the need to protect what we love, whether that be our state, our family, our beautiful environment, and the leadership that needs to be shown and is being shown in Australia from all sides of politics, and particularly from this side of politics. So I thank you all for how proactive that you've been in this policy space, and how you have shown that leadership in your own roles. And thank you for being on the panel. We'll wrap up now and have some informal discussion at the end. Thank you so much.